I've been wanting to make this video for a very long time. In a story as long as One Piece, there's bound to be characters that fall short of the yardstick, those who have been built up but don't quite stick the landing when they are given their time to shine and fall short of expectations, and Wano, being the controversial colossus that it is a goldmine for such discussions. And being such a long series, One Piece has a ton, thousands of other characters, and more specifically many villains to look over how well they fulfill their role in the story, being the latest roadblock on Luffy's path to becoming the king of the pirates. And we reach the subject matter of this video. This character, and I know this is a very unpopular opinion, is my favourite villain in the entire series, and whose legacy is immensely greater than people view it to be. This is the Governor General of the Beast Pirates, one of the four emperors, the king of the beasts and the world's strongest creature, Kaido. He who, right from the first time he appeared up to his end in Wano, was so entertaining the entire way through. I say his end in Wano, really we don't know if his role is completely over. There's always the possibility that he could come back in the present, and there's a really big chance that we will get more of him in the future via the extended Rocks or God Valley flashback. So as of now, let's assume that he has fully played his part in the story. I can pinpoint one single part, a singular chapter that greatly shifted the way a large portion of the fanbase viewed him as a character, and we will get to that eventually. But there is no better place to start than with his character introduction, which I hold as one of the greatest character introductions ever. From what we had been told of him previously, he is a member of the Four Emperors, pirates who rule over the second half of the Grand Line, and he had a run-in with Shanks pre-Marineford. So breaking that down, by the time he appeared in the flesh, we had seen the insane power of an old sickly Whitebeard who had devastated the Marine HQ, and Shanks, who up to that point we had barely seen anything from, but we saw how he single-handedly stopped the Paramount War and clashed on equal footing with that very same Whitebeard. And Big Mom, who all we had got to go off so far was her introduction, where she eats what I assume are a couple of her subordinates. So we understand, we entirely get that the Four Emperors are in a total league of their own in every way, and Kaido already has a lot to live up to. And when he finally arrives, he does more than that. His first appearance tells us all we need to know about who the character of Kaido is, jumping from 10,000 meters, wanting to die and wanting to start a war. Someone who has been living in a perpetual state of boredom and depression, looking for something, anything to get him going, and thus we are presented with the dichotomy that will stick with Kaido until his end, which is that of someone who has reached the top in search of the bottom. He speaks of his attempted south end as a minor annoyance while grumbling over Whitebeard succeeding where he has failed and continues to fail. His wish to die is a secondary one born out of spite for the world he lives in, compared to the other titans of the story whose dreams came from a place of adventure and joy. So while those others yearn for something beyond themselves, the names of those other legends have reached such lofty heights that no one can rob them of what they achieved in their life, whereas Kaido can see that grandeur only in death, because life is just such an inconvenience. Which leads us nicely into that controversial part, Kaido's backstory, something that lasted barely half a chapter and supposedly didn't add anything at all to his character, some even saying it took away from him. Kaido today is the strongest, but really Kaido had always been the strongest. Growing up in a war-torn kingdom where conflict was the norm, that was a normal day, and he was different, he was special, which in turn meant there would be others who would try to use him for their own gain. He wanted what the wider world, what every single person wants for, and that was his own freedom. Exposed to a world of deceit full of control, he wanted to break free of those metaphorical and literal shackles that held him from that. There are many paths to achieving freedom, and what purer form of freedom is there than complete chaos? Turning this boring world upside down, tearing those above from their high perches onto a level playing field, a battleground with no rules, no matter what little details or intricacies lie in between the lines of the world's structure. It is built upon the foundations of strength and power. Those more powerful use the weak for themselves, and he learned that firsthand. So while someone like Luffy's entire being goes against that system, who are we to judge Kaido for believing that freedom and power were always going to be synonymous with one another? His background did not give us any grand revelation about his character or the greater story, but it validated all we had been told about him up to that point. He became who he is, this mess wallowing in self-pity because no matter how hard he tried, there was just always something that pulled the rug from under him, never letting him reach that final stretch, let alone complete it. So when the whole world is telling him that he won't do it, whether he isn't allowed to or he just can't, then why wouldn't he turn his attention to said world? If it won't let him rise, he will force it to sink to his level. And that part of him not being able to do what he wants can be seen in the most intriguing but most speculative aspect of his story, which is Joyboy. A name he learned from King, this figure of legend who went against the world and became something greater than Kaido could ever be. So although it doesn't look like it, Joyboy is Kaido's greatest inspiration, but not in a traditional sense. He is no stranger to being amongst others greater than him. Just look at the Rocks Pirates and how there was no room for such gargantuan figures to coexist, each brought together by their strength but separated by their ideals, and in comes Joyboy, someone so great that everyone indiscriminately looked to as the guy. There's the opinion that Kaido wanted to be this figure, and while I do agree with it somewhat, I think there's a lot more to that sentiment. So he learns the name of Joyboy and all he represented. I believe that although Kaido did wish to fill those boots, he knew he couldn't, so he inevitably took up a different role, one that meant more than he even realized. He said Joyboy would be the one to defeat him, and unintentionally on his part, the validity of this statement grew the more Kaido sank. His present day self ended up being the perfect counterpart to stand opposed to and welcome the return of Joyboy. All he had learned in his earlier life taught him that the status quo was never meant to be changed, so he took it upon himself to destroy it. The revelation of Joyboy gave him something to ponder about, but that too only added to Kaido's sorrows because it was another thing, the greatest thing that he couldn't reach. So while the name Joyboy stayed in his mind for the rest of his life, it only served to remind him that any possibility of a new world was never meant for him. Similarly to how Whitebeard said there was no vessel that could carry him into the next era, differing where Whitebeard achieved his goals but Kaido could never achieve his. So as he fell deeper into the abyss, as he mocked the dreams, ambitions and joy of others, and as the world crumbled around him, it left only one person able to combat all of that, to challenge all that Kaido's fall had brought up, to beckon the dawn of the new era, and that was Joyboy. Like how Whitebeard sat beside the throne of Pirate King but never sat upon it himself, Kaido, whether intentionally or not, guarded the throne of Joyboy. He was closest to that throne before he even learned the name. When he met King, his ambitions were sky high. After the fall of Rocks meant that he would follow his own path, a seemingly clear path for the first time in his life. And we all know how reality came crashing down on him after that. The dream of changing the world ultimately ending with Kozuki Oden, who died, but with a hope and sight of the future clearer than Kaido could ever wish to see. And now in the present, another challenger approaches with a gleam in his eyes reminiscent of that Kaido long lost to the past. Someone whose will refuses to be broken by this broken man in a broken world with its broken rules. And even then, Kaido continues to be robbed of what he is looking for until the dawn finally shines across the horizon and Kaido's purpose is put to the test. Joyboy will be the one to defeat him. He can't see a future past the current regime, meaning he was the great wall that stood in front of it. His final moments at the hands of Luffy meant he would be nothing more than a footnote in someone else's story, because the type of freedom he ended up wanting barred him from seeing the real future that lied ahead. He couldn't look past his own death, and it inevitably ended up being one that no one would remember, while Luffy's death would be the one not to be remembered and looked back on in awe like Kaido wished for his, but one to bring in the new age filled with freedom and joy. Kaido can be summed up as a character who failed, who gave up, and that's why he was never meant to see the dawn, meaning he was never going to be complete. And the fact is that beside him was someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself, and that was King, yet he could still not see, not really. and what is either the most fulfilling or most insulting part of Kaido's story, depending on how you view his mental state when he was defeated, is that his death did nothing to help his legacy, while simultaneously propping up Luffy to the level of some of the greatest ever, alongside Wano's greatest hero Ryuma, ultimately disproving Kaido's belief that greatness could only be found in death. But it was also this moment that brought Kaido's biggest inspiration, his biggest what if, joyboy back into the world, possibly giving his death the greatest meaning of all. But there are still questions, and maybe contradictory to some of the points of this video. He was granted his joy in the final fight with Luffy. He was smiling and he was having fun. He was laughing throughout the entire fight, and I can't fully wrap my head around what Kaido must have been thinking here. He asked Luffy about the world he wanted to create. Did he begin to believe? Did he begin to yearn to see that world Luffy was going to create? Did he let himself be defeated? Or was he angry and was he jealous of Luffy since he wasn't smiling as he plummeted through the earth? I don't know. Another unpopular opinion I have is that I really want to see Kaido return to the story because he has so much more to offer. I've watched other videos on how good his character truly is, and they just further solidify that hope I hold that he will come back. I said that he is one of my favourite villains in One Piece, but scratch that, he is one of my favourite characters in One Piece period. The strongest creature who proved that title's worth, and a broken man who I hope one day we see put back together when he witnesses the dawn.